Hello and welcome to another Portland Cocktail Week distance learning session. I am so excited today because not only are we going to get a masterclass from the man himself, the global brand ambassador for Hennessy, Jordan Bushell, we are also talking about the brand new opportunity that just launched this week. It's called My Way USA. It's something you're going to want to learn a whole lot more about. But before we get into any of that, I want to remind all of you, if you want, we'd love to have you subscribe to the channel. Make sure that you're either hitting like, subscribe, or getting in there and liking the page. That'll make sure that you know about all of these opportunities as they happen. This is where all of our information comes through, so it's definitely a good place to be. Well, Jordan, I want to get into your masterclass, but before we talk cognac, I want to talk just a little bit about My Way USA and what we have planned for all of our friends.
For sure.
So tell us a little bit about what My Way is and sort of the history, the backstory.
So My Way is a competition to kind of show off your individual preferences or individual ways, or maybe a ritual you have. Ritual can be anything. I think every bartender has a ritual in their own way, whether it be the way in which they, when I garnish a glass or put a twist on, it's twist, drop in. If it's a stem, it's always the top of the stem as well. So those little things are rituals. And when you look at cognac and when you look at cognac production, and if you get the chance to come join me at the Maison, you're going to see a lot of those old school rituals, whether it be glove service of higher end bottles, whether it be the glasses we put it in, the way we even serve food at Chateau Bagnolet at Hennessy. It's all, there's a ritual to it. And so ritual often makes people feel good about something. It's comfortable. And so having a ritual with a cocktail, having a ritual with a serve of Hennessy, that's what we're asking of people. What's your ritual? We've seen some people globally do things that I hike a mountain and make a cocktail top for my friends that I'm hiking with. Others are creating a storyline that links their past with Hennessy, or their past with bartending to some specific ritual. Really, it's showing off your own creativity in more than just the cocktail and the ingredients, but the presentation of it as well.
Fantastic. And I think I maybe buried the lead here. You mentioned it, but the winner gets to go to the Maison, which to me is like the headline here. We're pretty excited to be able to send some folks, especially after a long time being at home, on maybe the most exciting trip a person can go on.
Yeah,
tell us a little bit about the Maison.
The Maison, I think when you get to go to a place, especially a place that's like a domain of origin, where cognac can only be made in cognac and it has to be made by certain rules that we'll go into. But when you get there, you start to understand a spirit more. You get to see just how life is lived there, how that spirit might have come to be. And you get to see the history, but you also get to see what we're working on for the future. You get to experience some of those rituals. And I love it because it just gives me another excuse to be there hosting you. So it's a win for me either way.
I absolutely love that. Another aspect of we've hosted a number of competitions over the years, and something that we're doing on this one that I'm really excited about is we're offering up some one-on-one time with the brand ambassadors on your team. And so if you're workshopping a cocktail, you want a little bit more information about Hennessy, any of the above, maybe you just want to hang out with Paris. I know that's what I would sign up for. You can go to pdxcw.com/office hours and sign up for one of the time slots that's available. Brittany will confirm it with you, make sure that you have all the information to get in that Zoom. But we really want to make sure that folks know exactly, they have a little bit of time to workshop. They have a little bit of time to ask those questions, because we're still not quite to the point where we're, all in person. And plus, this gives folks opportunities who are maybe in cities where there's a little less access to brand ambassadors, the chance to get in there and get that one-on-one time. So make sure if you want to participate in the program, but you're not quite sure where to start, this is a really good first step. So head over to pdxcw.com/office hours. We have a limited number of these available because brand ambassadors have other stuff to do. So make sure you sign up as quickly as you can so that you can get in there and get some of that one-on-one time. Your brand ambassador team is basically a list of my favorite human beings. So if nothing else, you're going to have a lovely half hour with some of the smartest people in our industry. So Jordan, I would love, I've taken a chance to go through the Hennessy My Way hashtag on Instagram, which I think is a really good place to start if you want a little bit of inspiration. This is a competition that has existed globally, but has not existed here in the US until now. So you can see what some of the other entries have looked like. You can see what some other folks have done, and it's a good jumping off point. What would you suggest to somebody who's thinking about hopping in, putting their name in the hat here?
Well, I would say do it first off.
Yes.
You know, being a Canadian, I love Wayne Gretzky quotes, and Wayne Gretzky said, you know, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So take the shot. And there were people that won globally from a variety of different countries that also had a variety of different, you know, the top 25 around the world were a variety of different rituals. Some were very authentic to their culture and the history of how they enjoyed it, whether it was, you know, making a cocktail and putting it in kind of a teapot and creating a kind of crazy ritual that way, or others that went with very, very much more modern approaches using kind of lab equipment and everything under the stars. But there's at the end of the day, it was the ones that struck home were the ones that had a story behind it that linked to it. And, you know, everyone's got a story to tell. This is the opportunity to tell yours and kind of create a ritual around it and have some fun.
Well, that I think is a great lead in. Leo, if you don't mind queuing up the Wayne Gretzky of the Hennessy My Way competition from last year, Aaron's video, I'd love for everyone to get a chance to see that one. Can we take a peek? Well, obviously that is a gorgeous serve and an incredible video, but I will say do not be intimidated, folks, because that is one example that is gorgeous and perfectly produced, but there are a million other examples of folks who have won that did it just with their phone. So definitely use that as a starting point, but also take a look over at the hashtag so you can see the vast number of entries that are all very different. Actually, speaking of, let's queue up that video where we can see just sort of like the overall experience. Leo, would you mind making that one pop up? A lot of friendly faces in that video. Really cool. A lot of big names from around the world, but also a lot of folks that are just getting into the business too. So it's really, this is one of those things where we're not looking for the most complicated cocktail. We're not looking for a million ingredients. We're really looking for your ritual and a story more than anything else. That's really at the heart of this, is the story.
Yeah, and when you look at like Aaron's video as an example, there's a couple of rituals in there. He's got the ice that he's shaping. That's a ritual in and of itself. Then he's got, and we saw that a few times in different shows within the world competition. But then he also, if you followed him online on Instagram, he broke down how he made the balloon. It was just like paper mache, like we were in grade school again, and made the balloon to add the smoke ritual to it, and talked about kind of travel and things like that, linked to that element of Hennessy traveling. And of course, Richard Hennessy was Irish, so he's very familiar with that story.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So anything can be a ritual to you. What you might just think of as, oh, that's just something I do.
Right.
to somebody else, that's a ritual. So
Absolutely. And this is really about telling your story, and it's really about bringing your personality into this. So as you're getting going, as those creative juices start flowing, think about that. Really kind of center this in you and your experience and who you are as a person. And if you hit those roadblocks, again, sign up for those office hours, and I think you're going to be able to get past some of those. Yeah, I know that when I'm working on a project, I love to have some feedback from folks who have a ton of experience, and certainly those brand ambassadors have a whole lot of experience. Okay, so Jordan, I think we may have talked about the competition enough. I don't know. If you have questions about it, put them in the comments. But we are going to get to the part that everybody's been waiting for, which is the Hennessy Master Class. So I'm going to kick it over to you, Jordan. I will be here taking notes. So
done. So welcome, everyone. Thank you all for coming. If you have any questions during this, as Lindsay said, for the competition, about the masterclass, about Hennessy, you can put them in the chat and somebody from Lush Life will make sure Lindsay has them. And then after this presentation, we'll be able to get to those questions. We also have Leo in the background that is our sort of cyborg who gets all our tech going. And so this is the presentation, the Bartender Academy, a deep dive into cognac. I am going to talk fast and loud. So again, if you have questions, put them in the chat, because cognac is a really complex spirit. There's a reason that we don't put how to make it on the back label of the bottle. There is not a label big enough or a font small enough to make that work. So you're going to hear Hennessy a lot. You're going to hear the word cognac a lot, and you're going to hear the word Leo a lot, because I need Leo to change the slides. So Leo, let's go. So we're going to start with where it all began, then get into the terroir of the region, the distillation, then oak and maturation, which is the aging process, then the art of blending, and then talking a little bit about how cognac historically related with bartenders. So if you have a question about terroir, know that we'll get to it in terroir, but don't ask about maturation when we're still talking about how the grapes grow. We'll get to that, and maybe we'll have covered your question. So Leo, next slide. Where it all began, and we can go to the next one. So the history of cognac is a really deep one, but it starts off as a brandy, and brandy started with the Dutch. The Dutch were trying to bring cognac or brandy, or sorry, white wine all over the world, and realized this white wine of Northern Europe didn't travel that well. And so to distill it, which the Dutch were also some of the preeminent distillers in Europe, they realized that that would allow it to travel over greater distance. And at the end of the day, they would get it to that final destination and sort of cut it down with water or another mixer. So when people think that cognac should be served neat, you know, there's a lot of thought around that. Well, I would say that's a far more modern way to drink it than historically, where it started as a mixer to get back to that white wine presence. The word brandy comes from the Dutch for brandy vin, which was burnt wine. Anyone that, you know, didn't speak the language shortened that to brandy, and then of course it was cognac brandy coming from cognac. Leo. So another fun fact historically was the 17th century, so early 1600s. Double copper pot distillation was actually pioneered as a technique in La Rochelle, which is kind of the border, or sorry, the one of the port cities in Cognac region. And so kind of whiskey, rum, the rest of the dark spirit world, you're welcome. Cognac helped pioneer double copper pot distillation. Unfortunately, the chemist's name has been lost to history, but I'd love to thank him anyway. Leo? So important to the history of cognac is not only Richard Hennessy's birth in 1724, but just before that, 1701 to 1714, the Spanish War of Succession, really that led to cognac aging. The cognac, or the trading ports around Spain were important for travel to Northern Africa, Western Africa, you know, the Mediterranean, the spice route off to the east. And without those ports, or with those ports under conflict, we didn't want to trade through them. So we kept a lot of our stock back in cognac and realized that the barrels, or sitting in those barrels, was doing something to the spirit. Previous to this, barrels were the FedEx boxes of their day. That's what we shipped spirit in. It wasn't necessarily used as a tool to add flavor or add complexity to the spirit itself. But that kind of started, or was realized, in the early 1700s. And then Richard Hennessy really thought this was the future of cognac when he started the Cognac House. So Leo? 1765, that's, if you forget this year, it's printed on every Hennessy bottle. 1765 is the founding of the house by Richard Hennessy. Richard was an Irishman who fled to France to fight with the French against the English, the enemy of my enemy being my friend, fought with the French against the English. This is him in his captain's uniform. He was stationed in Bordeaux, which is just south of Cognac. In fact, the northern border of Bordeaux is the southern border of Cognac. Leo? 1774, the founder's cellar was built. If you get to be the lucky one to go to Cognac, you will get to see the founder's cellar. It still holds casks to this day, though we have many other cellars afterwards. Before this, starting in 1765, Richard would age the eau de vie in the ground floor of his home, and he would sleep upstairs, and then he expanded, and the founder's cellar in 1774 was built. This is interesting because old cognac is often deemed to be drinking history in a glass. And when you look at 1776 was the signing of the Declaration of Independence, you can see that our cellars predate that signing. And this is just thinking about history. When you get to go there and see it, you'll see history in kind of everything you touch, everything you look at. So, Leo. This gentleman is the Prince of England at the time in 1817 when he sends letters to the cognac houses of France, and he's asking for a very superior old pale. That didn't exist at the time. But James Hennessy, son of Richard Hennessy, who had taken over the company when Richard died in 1800, realized the potential. Much like his father before him, he saw potential, and he said, okay, registered the acronym VSOP, and then shipped barrels to the Prince a year later in 1818. A VSOP, the Prince used this not just out of the blue, but he was asking for a superior, very old pale. A VOP was what was being deemed or what was being called of all of the products that were just sitting in those barrels that were aging, sort of at first by accident, but then later kind of on purpose. And he was asking for a superior VOP. He switched the wording because Old English was a little bit backwards to the way we might conjugate a sentence today. But very superior old pale was born even before VS or any of the other labels. So, Leo. Hennessy also created the world's first XO. This was in 1870. First shipment actually went to New York in 1871 and then to Shanghai shortly thereafter in 1872. At the time, there was no other XO. It was deemed that this might not be commercially viable. So actually for the first year, it was the house blend. It was the Hennessy house blend. This was Maurice Hennessy, third generation of the family. He created it simply to be served at Chateau Bagnolet in Cognac and at his home in Paris to serve to friends and families or visiting tradespeople or dignitaries. And eventually it was demanded that he sell it. And this was kind of this was the first actual like super premium spirit of super age. And so we can thank this possibly for other super age spirits at this point. But at this point, Hennessy XO is up to about 30 years old. And that is a beautiful thing to have back then. For the first 30 or 40 years, it was the only XO on the planet. And then other XOs came around. Leo? So Hennessy and Cognac were everywhere. They were doing well. They were kind of on every continent of the planet by the 1870s. And then this little bug came around. And for those of you that are into their wine, they might know this name, Phylloxera. But Phylloxera is a bug native to North America. It made its way over to Europe due to the Europeans seeing grape varietals in North America that they didn't have back in Europe. So they brought these grape varietals home with them, thinking that they would see their true potential if they planted them in the vastly superior, what they thought were vastly superior soils of France and Europe. Didn't know this bug hitched a ride. When this bug got there, it started laying waste. That was sometime in the 1860s. Reached kind of like its peak in and around the 1870s and 80s. But in 1875, we saw the first signs of it in the Charente region, which is the Cognac region, what we know of as the Cognac region. At the time, we had 282,667 hectares. Do you know what a hectare is? I didn't. A hectare is about a soccer field or a football field. Leo? What's important about this next slide is the bottom number, 46,000 hectares. So in 20-year span, we dropped from 182,667 hectares down to 46,000 hectares. That's sort of 80+% of our fields laid waste. This bug ate at the root systems, ate at the plants, ate at the leaves and the grapes, destroying the plant utterly. Now in North America, the plants were a little bit more robust. They were able to withstand this bug, or at least have a harmonious relationship with them where they weren't killed. And that's what a professor from Denison, Texas realized in 1888. And working with the grape growers of Europe, he created a phylloxera-resistant grapevine over there by using North American roots and grafting them on almost like an organ transplant to the vines of Europe, or the noble vines of Europe. In this time frame, as we were getting back into the flow of things, we'd kind of solved the process, and that was about rebuilding. Hennessy took over the #1 spot in cognac sales from Martel and Remy Martin. This is possibly, we believe, due to XO, really, in the sense that if we could make an old product like XO, stands to reason that we had the largest seller systems even back then, and that allowed us to sell older product while we couldn't create new product. Leo? It is important to remember when you look at it globally, if any of you have family or friends around the world, cognac and Hennessy were in 138 countries around the world by the start of the 1900s. We're in more today. But we've been in a lot of these countries so long that cognac has been kind of ingratiated into their culture. It's part of their culture and mixes with so many of their home flavors. And so when you think about this, and you can see this in Hennessy My Way hashtag on Instagram, you can see so many different cultures incorporating their own kind of flavors, their own kind of twists on it, because it's been in that country for so long. Leo? And you can skip right past these slides to the next slide, the terroir of the region. So unlike other dark spirits or aged spirits, cognac is a little bit different. We come from grapes, and realistically, this is what has led to, I believe, a lack of knowledge in it, because when I was working behind the bar, it was, everything behind the bar was what I wanted to learn about. So other spirits and elements like that, whereas the floor staff sold a lot more wine. When you came to the bar, you were looking for maybe some wine by the glass, but realistically, spirits, cocktails, beer, something like that. And I delved into that. So a grape-based spirit kind of fits, like, I understood the spirit side, but the grape side was lacking in a lot of ways. And what's interesting about that is it affects every part of the process afterwards. So when we look at, whiskeys and rums, they and tequilas, and you name it, they tend to have a singular distillate, a distillate that is 99.9% accurate to the one that came before it. And yet with cognac based on grapes are so subject to terroir, the soil or the sense of place, that one field year to year will produce different tasting grapes, but the field next to it in the same year will produce a different tasting grape. And so it really matters how it's handled and how it's done. And the AOC, or Appellation Origin de Contrôle, is kind of the French's domain of origin. In fact, this started in France and then went out to the rest of the world as far as a way to classify things and to keep the integrity of the spirit. Leo, next slide. When we look at this region, we look at 6 growing regions, and the first 2 are sort of right in the center, the dark gray and the lighter gray surrounding it, as Grand Champagne and Petit Champagne. Now, when we look at something like, let's look at Remy Martin as an example, they only use these 2 regions. Well, what does that do to their cognac? Well, very simply, they don't have a VS anymore because they only focus on these 2 regions. And these 2 regions, like Bordeaux wine, take a lot longer to reach their potential. And so it's deemed to be about 10 years that they start showing off their potential. That's why Remy Martin focuses on VSOP and above, because those age ranges work for VSOP and above, whereas most VSs are under 10 years old. And therefore, these 2 regions wouldn't necessarily show off their best potential at those ages. An immature eau de vie tends to be quite bitter, quite acidic, really, almost like an immature wine. And then as it ages or as it matures in the barrel, what you're going to get is the fruit starting to come out, that acidity coming down, and those barrel spices, of course, coming in and helping with that process. Now, I'd like to point out that in cognac, I was told very early on in my education that there are no definitives. And that's very frustrating for us. We want to know exactly how something is made, but there's only generalities. So when I say Grand or Petit Champagne is not in something like VS, it's too young. If there were Grand or Petit Champagne in VS, we would consider it an outlier to what we expect from Grand or Petit Champagne. But these are lines on a map. Sometimes a year is warmer, sometimes a year is colder, more rain, less rain. That's all going to affect the grape differently. And we have to take that for what it is and roll with the punches, so to speak. Next slide. The next two regions are Borderie and Fimbois, and these, along with the two Champagne regions, make up the original 4 regions. Now, it's important to note that all of these regions were not drawn on a map when we all started making cognac. These actually came about in the 1850s and were designated then for what the generalities of these regions were. And Borderie and Fimbois produce younger maturing grapes, and this is, by the way, the same grape varietal. So Uni Blanc makes up 99% of cognac to this day. And so Uni Blanc planted field to field is going to be different. Uni Blanc is better known as Trebbiano in Italian wine circles. Cognac is believed to be the most northern region in which Uni Blanc or Trebbiano is grown. We have a little bit more of a temperate climate. And so we get the grape out of it we want, which is a highly acidic grape. High acidity means low sugar. And that acidity acts as a preservative for us while we're waiting to distill it, because we can't add preservatives is one of the rules in cognac. But Borderie and Fimbois you tend to find in much younger cognacs. Not that they can't be in older cognacs. We have them in older cognacs as well. But the eau de vie they produce, or the distillate they produce, is going to mature quicker in general in those barrels. And so we're able to get them. Next slide, Leo. The last two were added to the mix in 1909, and this is Bonbois and Bois Ordinaire. We're experimenting with them as well, but these are generally used used as filler because their level of flavor profile doesn't meet the other ones presently. But as global warming is happening, as different producers or different farmers are figuring out the soil differences in Bonbois and Bois Ordinaire, we're getting some beautiful eau de vie. And at the end of the day, if it's a beautiful wine to make a beautiful distillate, that's all that matters, not necessarily where it comes from on the map. That's why on Hennessy bottles, you don't see where the grapes come from, because it's all about the quality of the eau de vie, not necessarily the origin of it. Next slide, Leo. Next. So when we're distilling this, you've heard me say the word eau de vie a number of times. Eau de vie is water of life. And Leo, you can click on next on this slide. It'll be the same slide. Something will pop up at the bottom. The eau de vie means water of life, and eau de vie spelt with EAU, and eau de vie spelled EAUX. EAUX is the plural of EAU, meaning more than one eau de vie. But by law, cognac must be a blend of at least 2 eau de vie. Eau de vie must be aged in oak for a minimum of 2 years to become that. But the eau de vie is the straight distillate of that wine. Generally, it's barreled at about 65% alcohol. And Leo, next slide. So distillation. The reason I want to show you this is it's a little bit different. Though we use copper pot stills, at Hennessy, we only use 2,500 liter stills. These are the smallest available to us by law. And we do this because we want to capture each individual field for what it is, for what its flavor profile is. We use light wine, so it's between 5 and 9%, mostly around 8% alcohol. And when we're making these cuts, you know, they have percentage values on this slide, but the cut is really made by flavor because each wine is going to react differently. So the distiller needs to be there to taste when the cut will happen. The alcohol percentage is going to give him some guidance on, like, okay, the cut come taste, because the cut is going to happen soon, but it's not done by percentage. It's not done by a machine. It's done by a human being tasting and deciding, yeah, that's the best for this wine, for this batch. We're using heads and tails that have a lot of floral and fruit compounds to cut back into the wine to adjust to get the distillate we want out of it. And that's done for both the first and second distillates. Now, at the end of the day, this is a very, very beautiful process, and we're only able to distill in cognac 3 weeks after we make the wine takes about 3 weeks to make. So depending on the year, harvest will happen kind of mid-September in through October. But as soon as the wine's ready, we're able to start distilling. We have to stop distillation by April 1st. So, it's not just April Fool's Day. That's the end of cognac production for the year. If you're distilling past March, you're not making cognac anymore. We like to, at Hennessy, stop as soon as possible. So we're generally done as even being the largest cognac house by the start of March. And that is done because we can't add preservatives to the wine. So it's just the acidity and the temperature we keep it at that keeps it fresh until we're ready to distill it. And it's deemed to be that after March, the wine would start to change on its own. And we don't want that. We want control of that wine. Next slide. Hennessy VS. So if you've got a bottle, now would be the time to grab a taste. But Hennessy VS is the cornerstone of not just Hennessy, but the cornerstone of the cognac market. Hennessy is the largest cognac house by far. We're 50% of the category. And a lot of that came about because we pull from all the different regions, and therefore we're able to make great young cognac and great old cognac. Hennessy VS is made up of a lot of Finois, some Bordeaux, but there could be some outliers of the other regions in there as well. And because of that, this is the quintessential cognac. If Hennessy only made Hennessy VS, we'd still be the largest cognac house in the world. It is something very special that our youngest, most price appropriate or price approachable option is so good, being called very special. Now, the age of VS ranges. Minimum by law needs to be 2 years, but it goes up to 8 years in the blend because grapes are chaos. We need to make a blend of a wide range of ages to get consistency. When other aged products are looking for consistency, they are looking to blend multiple barrels together to get that, but they're letting their spirit rest in the same barrel its whole life. We're constantly moving those spirits around to get the best out of each of them because each of them are so different. So they have consistency in the distillate and variety in the barrels. We have both to deal with, why we always move the eau de vie from barrel to barrel within its lifetime. But for the most part, Hennessy VS does spend a lot of time in new oak. This is not like bourbon, a law. This is a stylistic choice. So if there's a lineup of cognac in front of you and you're tasting them blind for fun, generally the boldest flavors there are going to be Hennessy. Hennessy makes bold cognac as a very simple statement to describe our process. If there's a way to have more flavor, we're going to take it. So new oak would go up against really powerful fruity eau de vie because if we put it up against light floral stuff that might be in like a Hennessy Black, for instance, it's going to get destroyed. So big, powerful eau de vie, it takes to go up against big oak. So you get a battle between the fruit and the oak on this one. That's why it mixes so well with those spice categories, but mixes so well with fruit as well because it's got a lot of that. I keep going to switch my slide, but that's Leo's job. Next slide, Leo. And you can click through this until all the things are on the actual slide. That's good. So these are the two types of oak in cognac. Now we could use other barrels potentially from France, but this is Limousin as wide grain oak is what we use exclusively at Hennessy. But Transailles is a fine grain, and the reason I bring this up is because fine grain is what most of the world uses, because most of the world uses old bourbon barrels, and American white oak is fine grain. So the Limousin oak difference is, and a lot of wine producers would use the wide grain because of this high tannic content. Tannins allow for longer aging processes, and often with new oak, tannins can be part of the bite on the front of your palate, but tannins over time will fall out of a spirit and you won't get that bite. Good example is Hennessy XO. Hennessy XO goes in new oak just like VS, but because of its time in barrel, you don't get that bite up front that you might get off of Hennessy VS. The other reason we like Limousin is its complex flavors. So it might sound like a shot that I'm saying, there's more direct or easily recognized flavors in fine grain, but we've put them under a spectrometer in our lab, and we've seen spectrometer measures 1,000 points or 1,000 flavor points and where they hit on your palate and when they decay on your palate. And what we've seen from fine grain is, big hits of like Boom, there's my caramel vanilla. Boom, there's my kind of apricot and fruit. Boom, there's my spice, but it's peaks and valleys. Whereas what we see with wide grain is a lot more flavors coming up. And as one flavor is dying on your palate or decaying on your palate, another flavor comes up to meet it. So you get more of a high plateau or a wave like in the ocean where it just keeps going and going and going. And one flavor sort of bleeds into the next and bleeds into the next. So it's harder to discern where one kind of flavor starts and another one stops. And so that's one of the things we like because we have, the complexity of using multiple different eau de vie to create a palette that we feel Limousin adds best to that palette. Now, when, discussing discussing myths and misnomers in the cognac world, you look at, some people will say, oh, we let our trees grow for a certain number of time. We let these things go. When people are talking about the age of their trees, what they're really talking about or should be talking about is the girth of the tree, because the width of the tree really is all that matters. When the tree grows to a certain girth, then we can harvest it to make barrels out of. Most barrels or most forests in France are owned by the French government, most oak forests, because it's so important to their wine production, to their, to Calvados, to Armagnac, to Cognac. That's a lot of industry over there. And so there's a 200-year sustainability plan built by the government into their forests. And if you want, these trees go up for auction and we buy them in plots that are ready, that the government says, yes, that's sustainable, you can cut that down. We have our own forests at Hennessy, and we use those really for research into how the weather is affecting trees, how global warming is affecting trees. Therefore, we get a better understanding of what we're buying at auction when we go to those auctions. But what we're really looking for is the girth of the tree, because this may be an entirely Canadian reference, but maple syrup, you don't drill to the heart of the tree to get maple syrup. You just drill into the outside layers, because a maple tree, much like an oak tree, that's where all the sap is flowing. And that's where the water is coming up from the roots to kind of spread to the rest of the tree. Well, as those trees grow, those veins in the tree harden, and when they're hard and they've stopped, now they're going to make a watertight barrel. And so that's what we're looking for. So Limousin, being wide grain oak, gets greater growth, but also within that produces more complex flavors. So that's what we enjoy about it. We naturally dry our oak for 3 years outside to allow those harsher tannins and those harsher younger flavors to kind of leave. And then we're getting when we get to toast, and we do a heavy toast. Char is bourbon, toast is kind of the rest of us, but that heavy toast is going to bring out those beautiful vanillas and beautiful caramels and beautiful flavors in the barrel. We get 20,000 new barrels a year. French oak is quite expensive. It's about €1,000 a barrel. So we spend about 20 million euro a year on new barrels to create stuff like Hennessy VS and XO. Next slide, Leo. This one's just simple math. We can get through it. VS must be minimum 2 years old. As I've said, many producers go well beyond that. We go up to 8. And actually, the median is what you're looking for. The average between the two, that's generally where the most eau de vie come from. So for VS, there's more 5-year-old than anything. There's very little 2. There's very little 8. There's more 5, 4, and 6, because that's when, on average, we're going to see that potential come out, because that's kind of, in general, what we expect. VSOP, that average age is going to be somewhere between 4 and 15. And for XO, minimum age is 10. We start ours at 14 and we go up to 30. So the median age is somewhere like 21, 22 years as far as that goes. Whereas if you looked at whiskey and it said 12 years on a bottle, there's generally going to be some 13, some 14, some 15, some 16, maybe more, depending on the producer. But generally there's less of a range of age. That's not a shot against them. That's just a reflection of they have a distillate that is consistent, whereas our distillate is chaos. So we require more range of age to create consistency. Leo? VSOP. So VSOP is my desert island cognac. I'm still not sure why I would be given a choice if I were going to be marooned on a desert island, but there's a good chance I would have VSOP on me anyway. VSOP, as I said, is 4 to 15 years. It does not go in new oak like VS or XO. It goes in 5-year-old barrels. So 5-year-old barrels we would classify as a category C barrel, A being new oak, B being in between, D being older, and E being close to neutrality. VSOP, I would compare it to if VS is like bourbon because it goes in new oak, so bourbon drinkers cognac. VSOP is Scotch drinkers cognac. Obviously not Ardbeg or Lafroig or the peaty ones, but more the sherry, port, or wine finished scotches, because they're getting that fruit from the grape, fortified wine or the wine that was in that barrel before. We're already grapes, but we're going in a 5-year-old barrel like Scotch using old bourbon barrels or old port or sherry barrels. A lot of those tannins have already been removed by the product that was in it before. A 5-year-old barrel has about 40% of extractable flavors and tannins left. And that's why we like it for VSOP, because VSOP to me is harmony between wood and fruit. And to me, there's no bite on it. You get this beautiful red fruit coming through that gets integrated really lovely with the spice. That's why I love it with a lot of classic cocktails where you're going to put that spirit first, because it's so beautiful all on its own. If you haven't had a VSOP Sazerac, I strongly recommend you have one. Next slide, Leo. Next slide. Okay, so back to Hennessy. One of the reasons Hennessy has been successful over the years is it's not just the Hennessy house. It's two families working in collaboration for 8 generations now. We talked about James Hennessy before, becoming the creator of VSOP, recognizing the opportunity, but he also recognized the opportunity and the conundrum he was in when his father passed away in 1800. To grow the business, he needed to be the representative. He needed to be the first brand ambassador. And to do that, he couldn't be, there making the product and growing the brand in that way. He needed a partner. And so he appointed Jean Filiu, who Jean Filiu at the time was Richard Hennessy's cellar master. He appointed him as the first master blender for Hennessy. So since that point, we are now at the 8th generation of both the Hennessy family. You can see Maurice Hennessy on the left here, and the man nosing that glass is Renaud Filiu de Geron. He's the 8th generation master blender. He started a couple of years ago and took over from his uncle, Jan Filiu. So this has really been a collaboration of the two families. Leo, next slide. This has been the Hennessy family throughout time. Notice the name Maurice. It happens 3 times in 8th generation. They really, really like the name. But this family has been tried and true running the business side of it. Well, the Filiu family, and we can go to the next slide, Leo, has been running the production side of things. And what's really worked is that the two families trust each other. The Hennessy family, Maurice Hennessy has said of the Filiu family that his ancestors trusted the Filiu family to never make a decision to affect the superior quality of the cognac. And Renaud has said of the Hennessys that his family knew that the Hennessys would never make a business decision that would cause his family to have to make decisions for the inferiority or that might negatively affect the production of cognac. I remember years ago when VSOP was at a shortage, they went to the tasting committee. They went to Renaud and said, "Hey, could you make where are we at with the future of VSOP? Can we make more of it right now?" And he said, "We could make more, and maybe 1% of people would notice the difference, but we're not going to, because at the end of the day, if you can't get it, you can't get it. When you get it, with 100% certainty that it will be of the quality you know and love." And so that's a beautiful thing for a company to do. Now, this is also on every Hennessy bottle, along with the 1765, the Bras Armé. So the Bras Armé is the axe and the arm you see on the right, but it came from the Hennessy family crest. The Hennessy family crest is the axe and the arm with the boar on the shield, and underneath, in Latin, it says, "Live by strength of arms." The boar was given to the Hennessy family because the Hennessy family had vision, and they pursued their vision relentlessly. I don't hunt, but I've been told boars are very dangerous to hunt because they will run right through you, as was done to the Baratheon king in Game of Thrones, gored by the boar. Now, I know he's poisoned as well, but the boar is still dangerous. So the Hennessy family was deemed to be, like the boar, singularly focused on their vision being that to create the world's best cognac. Now, they know that's impossible because everyone on this training has a different preference. Some love VSOP, some will love VS, some will love XO. Some haven't found the cognac that's perfect for them yet. That's Hennessy's goal, to keep producing great cognac, to eventually have, the best one for you, the best one for me, the best one for, our friends. And that is represented by new moniker that Hennessy took of this, old ethos of the Hennessy family crest, which is, you see it out there a lot. You see it in the bottom right of your screen. Never stop, never settle is basically the mantra that Hennessy has been living by for 8 generations. Next slide, Leo. All right, so I'm not going to spend too long on this because we only have 15 minutes left, but the Few House throughout time, we can look at Alfred and Raymond where it says major blends. We can excuse them for not creating anything new because Jan Few has said of his ancestors that without them, we might not have cognac today. We certainly wouldn't have Hennessy because if you look at that time, 1890 to 1941, that Alfred was in office as the master blender. That's an incredibly long span, but also for those paying attention earlier, that was during phylloxera. He took over and went through the First World War, the Great Depression, and the Second World War, and died in office when Raymond took over. So Raymond and Alfred before him really were responsible for being able to progress cognac through some very difficult times in Europe, some very difficult times for cognac, and some very difficult times for the world. So without them, we wouldn't be able to do what we do today because, of course, when Renault goes to make a new XO, Renault was 12 years old when some of those eau de vie were going into barrel. So he has to take that into consideration that anything he puts down today, anything he uses today, he needs to replace for the next generation because 30 years from now, he's going to be 72. He's probably not going to be in office anymore. And so he needs to put down stuff today that can be the XO of the future while using the stuff of the past. And that's a beautiful thing, but that's also an incredible responsibility. So next slide, Leo. And I think we can skip over the next slide. Nope, stay here. So to do this, Renault has help. He has the tasting committee, which you can see in the bottom left. Some of them are cut off in that shot. It's a beautiful picture though, so we wanted to keep it. But the tasting committee meets every day between the hours of 11 and 1 to taste between 40 and 60 eau de vie every day. They meet in the same room every day, every business day, Monday to Friday. They're not working weekends, to taste our eau de vie, to taste new eau de vie, to determine whether it's quality enough to represent Hennessy. And then if it is, what path is it going to take? Is it going to go in new oak? Is it going to go in older barrels? Which one do we think it has the potential to be? And then during the rest of the year, so after distillation periods, going into Aprils and Mays, before they're, before they get to harvest again and start producing new eau de vie, they're tasting our aging stock to see if they were right and how it should follow that path. Does it have enough oak presence? Should it be taken out of this younger barrel and put in a more seasoned barrel to ride out its time to reach its maturity? Or is it mature and ready for blending? All of these things are considered by the tasting committee every day. You don't get to there are other tasting committees out there, I will say, but you don't just get to be a tasting committee member because you know something of cognac. You have to train for 10 years to be on the Hennessy committee. Each member of the committee is a master at cognac themselves. Some of them have been master blenders for other houses, but come to work for Hennessy because they get to play with the greater amount of eau de vie, but they also get to work on research and development in their own field. So some of them, one of them is our cellar master, one of them is our director of distillation, one of them handles all of our fields, our vineyards, but also manages the 1,800 families that grow grapes that we buy from, along with our director of distillation is handling the 800 different distilleries that we get eau de vie from. 3 of them our own, 19 under contract to us, and then the rest that might sell eau de vie to Remy, Martel, other houses, and then they might sell to us as well. So this is the beautiful thing about cognac. We use these 1,800 growers to get that complexity and that diversity, and that's a beautiful thing, but that leaves a lot of work for the tasting committee every day who has to taste together in that time. Blending takes 3 steps. This is much like creating a cocktail. You create the idea of it, you know the core ingredients you want, and then you go through it in 3 different, with the blend, it's 3 different times to kind of hone that recipe in to get it to either something like Hennessy VS to create the consistency year in and year out, or something like Master Blender series behind my shoulder there is all one-off blends, so something unique, something different. Leo, next slide. This is Jean Filiu actually here with the glasses in the kind of bottom right, leading the tasting committee all those years ago, all those generations ago. So they sit in that same room today, doing those tastings to create the best eau de vie today. The room's all white to not kind of screw with their emotions, not kind of screw with their palates. As you can imagine, for anyone that's done a blind tasting 40 to 60 is quite a feat, requires a lot of concentration. So the white room is to not kind of distract them. Next slide, Leo. And I think we can skip. No, this one's XO. So XO, you can see in the kind of tasting notes here, it's a lot of mortar and pestles because XO is not like a lot of other cognacs in that when it was created as this extreme age, but it got these fruity notes and these flavor complexity from the barrel that cognac was all about the fruit with a little bit of oak. Now XO flipped the script on that to be really, really potent, really big flavors. If I gave you XO as the only example that cognac was made from grapes, you might think red wine because of all those flavors that come out. Gone are the apricots and the peach, and in enter the kind of baked apple notes, those fig, those date, those heavier notes, rancio, walking into a cigar bar and smelling the kind of sweet pipe tobacco, the spicy cigar tobacco, the leather on the chairs and the furniture, all of that is in XO, and XO is a beautiful product. It mixes well, but of course, neat or on the rocks is a beautiful thing to it. I'm not going to spend too long on this because I think everyone's got their own palates and can experience it in their own ways. But the My Way competition coming up, we've covered VS, VSOP, and XO, and you'll see it in the rules. You have the opportunity to use any one of these should you like, but every one of them can be something beautiful. So again, next slide, Leo. Now the bartender's influence, we can skip, perfect. First cocktail book, Jerry Thomas's guide for those that don't know it, but the Bartender's Guide or the Bon Vivant's Companion, written in 1862. Jerry Thomas, next click, Leo. Jerry Thomas seen there making the famous blue blazer, the iconic image of him. Of course, he realized ESPN wasn't on behind him, so he had to be entertaining in and of himself. He collected a lot of these recipes on his travels and wrote this book. Next slide, Leo. We can see the very first cocktail in the very first cocktail book is a brandy punch. So brandy and cognac were synonymous with cocktails back then, and yet today most menus will be lacking a cognac cocktail, lacking a brandy cocktail. Even French bistros that have a lot of cognac behind the bar might not have a lot of cognac cocktails, or might have more whiskey than they do cognac. But if you go through this book, you see a third of the recipes are brandy based. There's a lot of rum in there as well, and I think rum is suffered a similar fate to cognac in a lot of ways, outside of the tiki rum. But if we go to the next slide, Leo, you can see things like the mint julep, cognac based. Now, keep in mind, back then, you would have said brandy, and you would have kind of picked for the best. Cognac was often known as the best of the brandies, the king of the brandies, but we didn't have our AOC yet. So it was called cognac brandy. Now it's just often referred to as cognac because in 1936, we got that AOC that made it impossible to make cognac anywhere else in the world, and you had to make cognac under certain rules. Before that, you could see cognac popping up with a K in the spelling, or cognac-y, or multiple different kind of people trying to play off the power of cognac. But cognac was known as the world's kind of best brandy or most desirable. But then, of course, phylloxera happened, and cognac was replaced in many of these cocktails, like the julep, with bourbon, with other things, with rye. So we can flip through these ones pretty quick, Leo, to get the questions, but I'll just touch on them briefly. Next. I don't know why there's a second slide of that. Mint julep. So 1803 was actually the creation of the mint julep. Back then, it was supposed to be equal parts apricot brandy and cognac. Today, we're starting to see more actual apricot brandies come out. But in general, when you pick up an apricot brandy bottle, it's generally more liqueur than it is brandy. That's why this recipe is not equal parts, but to each their own. Create, look, love. Next slide. Brandy Crusta, created in 1840. This to me is, oftentimes looked at as kind of maybe an origin note for the sidecar that came later. much like anything in New Orleans, a little bit boozier than most things. So I quite like this cocktail. Important thing to note that the sugar rim, if we're looking at rituals, this was often done as part of the mise en place well before the bar opened, so that when it came time, it was almost like rock candy on the glass and you weren't getting a big mouthful of sugar. So if you are making crustas, I like to rim the glass ahead of the rest of the steps of the making of the cocktail, so that I get something similar to that kind of rock candy-esque. I don't want a mouthful of sugar. I just want the drink to flow over it and be enjoyable that way. Next slide, Leo. The Sazerac. If you haven't had a Sazerac with VSOP, I don't know what you've been doing, but I would encourage you to try it. Important thing to note with Sazeracs or old-fashioned-esque style cocktails with cognac, I believe you don't need as much sugar. So a quarter of an ounce of simple syrup. If you were making a rye Sazerac, it might be more like a half ounce. To this, if you're doing it the classic way, it might be half a sugar cube versus a full sugar cube. But there you go. Next slide, Leo. Japanese cocktail, definitely not PC by today's standards, but I wanted to bring it up because it is considered to be the first cocktail to bear a name that was solely for the selling of the drink. Much like the Sex on the Beach from the 80s, somebody thought that might intrigue somebody to order it. Japanese cocktail back in 1887. Global travel was kind of a realm of the rich, but it was still thought about as this mythical place, Japan. And so at the end of a busy workday, you could go into a bar and order a Japanese cocktail and imagine yourself exploring far off lands, although none of these are Japanese ingredients. Thus, the reason for it, to entice people to buy it. Previous to this, every cocktail was sort of the recipe was in the name. Leo, next cocktail. French 75, sometimes made with gin, sometimes made with cognac. Who knows? All I know is the French 75 bar in New Orleans makes it with cognac, so I'm going with them. But no, seriously, cognac is obviously going to be a little bit more robust than gin. Gin is going to be a little bit more lighter and brighter. And cognac, I like the grape and the grape kind of combination of champagne and cognac. It goes really well together. And if you haven't had one, be careful. It's named after the French 75 millimeter cannon. I'm telling you this for some ritual maybe ideas within your productions, but the French 75 millimeter cannon was the cannon that defended France in the First World War and parts of the Second. This drink is said to have the same kick. Next slide, Leo. Sidecar, everybody, if you know cognac cocktail, you probably know the sidecar. This one doesn't have a sugared rim, as that's a little passé. Giuseppe Gonzalez, I stole this recipe from him. He added that little bit of simple syrup because the orange curacao, a cognac-based orange curacao, like Grand Marnier, like Pierre Ferrand, dry curacao. I like those because cognac and cognac. And that though is not generally as sweet as some others like triple sec or other orange liqueurs. So to get the right amount of lemon juice, we need a little bit of simple syrup. Adds viscosity, doesn't have a sugared rim, looks beautiful, creates balance. Next slide. One of my favorite cocktails is Between the Sheets because it's a classic based on a classic. So this was based on a sidecar and actually created by the same gentleman that created the sidecar, Harry at Harry's New York bar in Paris. Thank God for Prohibition. I mean, America, you suffered a lot, made a lot of Canadians very rich, and you gave the world cocktails in a lot of ways. So an American bartender goes over, creates a sidecar, creates Between the Sheets. Great cocktail, equal parts rum, curacao, and cognac. Makes something really, really wonderful. Next slide, Leo. And lastly, the Vieux Carré, which I think would be far more popular if people could pronounce it, but Vieux Carré stands for Old Square. So I've seen it on menus as the Old Square. Great for people that love whiskey because you can put whiskey first on the menu. And I think this is a beautiful combination of a cognac Sazerac and a rye Manhattan put together with a little bit of Benedictine and no absinthe, but it's almost the same two cocktails put together. Beautiful cocktail. If you haven't had one, I encourage you to try it. And last slide, Leo. This is me. If you have any more questions that you didn't get to ask today, please reach out, please ask questions, and love to help you. I was told in my bartending career by a general manager when I was the bar manager behind the bar, anybody who walks in that front door is your boss in a way. You make them happy, you make me happy, you make the owners happy. And as an ambassador, I flip it to anybody who works in a bar is sort of my boss in a way because my job is to help you do your job.
And Jordan, what a good way to transition into the many questions that we have for you. First of all, I wanted to say thank you so much. That was without a doubt the fastest cognac crash course and more information than any person could possibly cram into an hour. So thank you so much for all
No
of
worries.
that. That was amazing. And you know what? I think you are one person who talks faster than me, which congratulations. That's hard to do. All right. So let's get into some of these questions before we let everybody go. All right. So what's the oldest stuff still in the founder cellar?
It is 1893.
That's incredible. Absolutely incredible. Okay. Next question takes us in a totally different direction.
Hold on. Sorry. 1893 still in barrel, but we have stuff that goes into glass globes known as demi-johns or dom-johns when it's done maturing, and that is 1800.
Oh my goodness. I've put eyes on those. I didn't know that they were quite that old, but that's incredible. What's the most off the wall ingredient you've seen paired with Hennessy? One that you were like, this sounds wild, but it ended up being really delicious.
I think, to be honest, there's a lot of versatility in cognac because it has that barrel, but it has that fruit. So almost like when you're playing with gin, you have that like fruit side, but you have that botanical side, and you don't really know. Sometimes you're aiming at the fruit side and you get the botanical side out. I think cognac goes a lot in that way as well. So with that, I wouldn't say there's. I would say the one that I was asked about was caviar. Did it pair well with caviar? And turns out it's definitely non-traditional, but it almost comes off like salted caramel. So yeah, it does work in that way. And I think if you have like saline solution or something like that to a cognac cocktail, it does work really, really well because of that kind of salted caramel effect as well.
That makes perfect sense. And I now really want to try that. So I'm going to put that on my list. All right. So there's no standard mix of grapes from particular crus for Hennessy VS is the question here.
Yes. So there's, I mean, in general, it's going to be a lot of Fimbois. Because Fimbois has big fruit and we go up against New Oak, so we need the big fruit. So in general, it's going to be a lot of Fimbois. There's going to be some Borderie in there, which gives you a little bit of tickle at the back of your throat, that spice. But Borderies tend to be lighter, more floral. You look at a house like Martel. Martel is a lighter style than Hennessy. They tend to focus a lot more on Borderie for that reason. So you can see kind of a difference there. Whereas if you look at a house like Cavassier, they use a lot more Fimbois as well. So you can see more similarities between those two. Though the difference between us and Cavassier would be we use Limousin and they use Tronchay in that younger stuff. So you get to see a difference there if you want to taste them.
And just a little reminder, if you do My Way USA and you're part of the competition, you'll get to see in person, you'll get to see all of these beautiful regions and you'll get to taste those grapes and really get a sense of what that looks like. So that is maybe the most exciting part. So somebody asked, did you say that you move the eau de vie among the different barrels? Yes.
So every year when the tasting committee tastes the eau de vie, they're going to start determining what is happening to that barrel because every distillate is different. So once it goes in the barrel, the goal is to help that eau de vie tell its story. And some, are going to be lighter. And if we just did everything the same, we could destroy that eau de vie. We want to show off the difference of that eau de vie and create something great out of it. And then if it doesn't fit in VS or VSOP, we'll find something like a Master Blenders or a one-off that it will fit in. But at the end of the day, they're making those decisions for the betterment of each individual eau de vie. And they'll, an eau de vie might move every year potentially, but that would be an eau de vie. Each batch will be treated the same. So a batch is a singular field from a singular year, and it'll all be resting in like, let's say the category A barrels in New Oak. And then they'll say, oh, you know what? This has enough spice, but it still needs more time to mature. Now we're going to put it in a category D barrel that's a little bit more neutral. And so all of them from those barrels are going to be put into a neutral oak vat to then be transferred into those other barrels. And that way as well, that neutral oak vat allows us to know that every single barrel in that batch should be the same fractionally as every other barrel in that batch. And then when we're looking at blending, we're looking at blending batches together because the batches will be different.
That makes perfect sense. And again, this is something that you'll be able to see these barrels if you are a winner of the competition. So that's a pretty good perk there. All right. So somebody asked, what happens in March if you stop distilling? What do you do in April? What do you do in May?
It's funny because I've taken a taxi in Cognac and was talking to the guy, and he said, "Oh yeah, I'm a distiller." And I was like, "Oh yeah, it's summer. You're not distilling, so you're doing something else." So some of our distillers are calligraphers, and they actually are the ones that write all the wording on the barrels for us. So in the summer, they're just going to be in the cellars managing the different barrels and things like that. But
talk about
they're distilling
artists.
part of the year. So yeah, we distill for that roughly 5 months a year, and then the rest of the year they might be doing something else. If some of these people are they're growing the grapes, making the wine, and then distilling it as all on their own. So it could be they're doing that. What does a farmer do in winter? There's still stuff. There's planning. There's other things going on. Maybe they have livestock. The same is true of Cognac. They're going to find something else to do. They're not just one trick ponies.
Absolutely. I think that's so interesting, especially the calligraphers. I think that just speaks to the artistry that goes into all the aspects of making Hennessy. All right. Last question, but certainly not least. Is VS only aged in new barrels?
Well, that goes back to there are no definitives. There are only generalities. So in general, an eau de vie that represents VS would likely, with its bold character or bold fruit notes, be put up against new oak with the thought of this is going to be VS. However, there might be eau de vie that change. Wherever they were in the cellar, they might have been thought to have been going destined for VSOP, and they happen to mature quicker than we thought. And so that might then make its way into VS. So it's not excluded just because it didn't go in new oak, but in general, they're going to be new oak focused. It doesn't mean they're not going to be that. That also, on the flip side, doesn't mean that something that went in new oak can't be in VSOP. It just means, in general, the bulk of the makeup of that eau de vie will likely have seen new oak at some point, because we like that spice against that fruit for VS.
Absolutely. Well, Jordan, this, as I mentioned before we get into the questions, this was the most information anyone could possibly get in 1 hour about Cognac. I feel like I know so much more than I did just an hour ago. So thank you so much for that. And a reminder to everybody watching out there, make sure you head over to pdxcw.com/myway, and you'll be able to see all the rules for the competition, because after hearing all of this, I have a feeling all of you are going to want to go check out the Maison. I know I want to go back. I'm desperate to go back after hearing all of this. You brought back all of these great memories. So check out the rules. Also, make sure you sign up for those office hours, pdxcw.com/office hours. This is one of those, one of a kind opportunities where you get to spend a little bit of time workshopping your concept. The time slots are very, very limited because our brand ambassadors are very busy. So make sure you sign up now so you get one of those spots. All right. Well, Jordan, thank you so much for all of your time today and all of that information. This was awesome. We will see all of you soon. Thanks for watching.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, and good luck, everyone.
Yes, good luck.